The doctor said her organs were failing and his voice was calm, almost bored, as if he were talking about the weather. And she lay there staring at the ceiling feeling smaller than she had ever felt in her life. Once she owned towers of glass and marble. Once people stood when she entered a room. Once her name could open any door. But now she could not even lift a cup of water without help. And that was when she heard it, a thin rough voice from the open window below, laughing softly and saying, "I'd pour this into a flower pot. What a waste." And the words hit her like a slap because she knew exactly what he was talking about. The medicine that cost more than most people earned in a year. The medicine the nurse had just given her like it was nothing. Like it was air. She turned her head slowly, her body aching, and whispered, "Who said that?" The nurse froze, her eyes nervous, and said, "No one, ma'am. Just a street kid outside. He's always hanging around." She felt anger rise, the old anger that once ruled boardrooms. "Bring him up," she said quietly. The nurse hesitated, but power still lived in that voice, and minutes later the boy stood at the doorway, thin as a shadow, barefoot, dirt on his cheeks, eyes sharp and alive, not afraid, not impressed, just curious. "You were talking about my medicine," she said, and he shrugged. "I saw you throw half of it away yesterday. The nurse dumped it in the sink when you were asleep. My mom died because we couldn't afford one dose like that. So yeah, I'd pour it in a flower pot. At least something would live." Silence swallowed the room. The nurse went pale. The boy's words weren't angry, just tired. Tired in a way only people who lose everything too early become. The woman closed her eyes and for the first time in years felt something crack inside her chest that money had never touched. "Go," the nurse snapped, but the woman lifted one trembling finger. "Stay," she whispered. "What's your name?" "Leo," he said. "And where do you sleep?" "Wherever the rain doesn't hit, sometimes under the bridge, sometimes near the bakery if the owner isn't angry." She swallowed hard. She had once fired people for being late, once destroyed families with a signature, and now a child stood before her with nothing but honesty. "Why are you here every day?" she asked. "Because rich people drop food," he said simply. "And sometimes they drop things that can be sold for medicine, but mostly they drop nothing." And he looked at her then, really looked. And for the first time she felt seen not as a queen but as a human breaking apart. "You don't look happy for someone with so much," he said quietly. The nurse gasped. But the woman didn't get angry. She laughed. A weak dry laugh that turned into coughing. "Happiness is expensive," she whispered. "More expensive than that medicine." He tilted his head. "My mom said happiness is when you're not scared to wake up." That hit harder than any insult she had ever heard. She had everything and woke every morning terrified of losing it, of being replaced, of being forgotten, of dying alone like she was now. "Leo," she said slowly, "would you come back tomorrow?" He nodded. "If the guards don't chase me away, I'll make sure they don't," she whispered, and that night for the first time in months she slept without pills, not well, but peacefully. The next day he came again, and the next, and slowly he told her stories about the streets, about sharing bread with other kids, about hiding from drunk men, about dreaming of becoming a mechanic because broken things made sense to him. She told him nothing about her past at first, just listened, just felt. Sadness came heavy as rain, the sadness of wasted years, of hurting people for profit, of pushing away the only man who ever loved her because he was poor. Helplessness followed when the doctor said the disease was spreading faster, that the medicine was only slowing the inevitable. Then one afternoon Leo arrived with a bruise on his face. "What happened?" she whispered. "Security threw me away from the gate. Said trash doesn't belong near rich people." Her fingers clenched weakly in the blanket. She had once said similar words herself. Quiet hope flickered inside her chest. A small warm spark that hadn't existed before. She called for her lawyer that same evening. A tall man in a perfect suit who once feared her. And she told him to listen and not interrupt. Patience guided her words as she spoke slowly, carefully, changing documents, redirecting funds, opening accounts he couldn't question. Days passed. Leo kept coming despite the guards, slipping through gaps, smiling every time he saw her. And one morning the nurse rushed in crying. The hospital across town just received a massive anonymous donation, enough to treat every child for free. The woman closed her eyes as tears slid down her temples. Leo smiled wide, like the sun breaking through clouds. "Was that you?" he whispered. She nodded faintly. That was just the beginning, she said. Weeks later, shelters opened, food kitchens expanded, medicine centers built, all funded quietly, all saving lives. The media praised mysterious angels, but no one knew her name, and for the first time she felt light. Then the lawyer returned, pale and shaking. The board tried to seize your company while you're sick. They forged signatures. They're taking everything. She smiled softly. Let them. He stared in shock. You don't understand. They're stealing billions. She looked at Leo playing with a paper airplane beside her bed. I understand perfectly, she whispered. That money already belongs to people who need it more. He left confused, and that night she held Leo's small hand. I won't be here much longer, she said gently. He shook his head hard. Don't say that. You're strong. She smiled. Strength isn't living forever. It's changing something before you go. Promise me something. He nodded with watery eyes. When you fix things, fix people too, not just engines. He sniffed. I promise. Her breathing slowed as peace wrapped around her. Sadness had turned into purpose, helplessness into hope, hope into patience, and patience into quiet justice, because while the powerful tried to steal her empire, it dissolved into hospitals, homes, and futures they could never control. And when she passed away that morning, there was no grand funeral, just a boy standing outside the gates holding flowers, but across the city children were alive because of her, and the men who thought they had won would soon learn there was nothing left to take, only the truth of what greed had cost them. The day after she died, the mansion gates stayed closed and the city kept moving like nothing had changed, but inside the boardroom across town the men who once bowed to her name were smiling for the first time in years. They thought the empire was finally theirs. They poured drinks, laughed loudly, and signed papers they barely read, certain they had won, while Leo sat on the curb outside the hospital clutching the flowers he never got to give her, feeling empty in a way hunger had never felt, because hunger always came back, but this loss felt final. He didn't cry at first, he just stared at the ground as nurses walked past him without noticing, until a black car stopped slowly in front of him and the lawyer stepped out, his face no longer cold and sharp but tired and unsure. Leo, he said softly, she asked me to find you. The boy looked up in shock. She left something for you. Fear and hope twisted together in his chest as he followed the man into the car, driving through streets he had only seen from sidewalks, arriving at a small quiet house near a park. Not a palace, not a tower, just a warm place with open windows and sunlight. This is yours, the lawyer whispered. She bought it months ago under a false name. For you, and for any kids who need a safe place. Leo's lips trembled. Why me? He asked. Because you reminded her what being human felt like, he answered. Inside were beds, clean clothes, a fridge full of food, and a letter on the table written in shaky handwriting. Leo, you gave me peace when I had nothing left. Now let this home give others what you never had. Love, safety, and a future. Don't be angry at the world. Change it slowly. Like fixing broken parts, one at a time. Tears finally fell as he hugged the letter to his chest. But across the city the men who stole the company began to feel something wasn't right. Accounts were empty, properties gone, patents transferred. One slammed his fist on the table screaming, she tricked us. Another shouted, this is impossible. Billions don't vanish, but they had. Every legal path signed, sealed, and untouchable. All redirected to charities, trusts, and foundations that could never be reclaimed. Panic replaced celebration as lawyers were called. Threats were made, but nothing could reverse it. And when the news broke that the richest woman in the region had given away nearly her entire fortune before dying, the public exploded in shock and praise, while the men who planned to profit became laughingstocks overnight. Yet their anger didn't fade. It sharpened. Find the boy. One of them growled. He knows something. He was always with her. We take what she loved. Leo didn't know danger was coming. He spent days cleaning the house, welcoming 2 younger kids the lawyer brought, cooking simple meals, laughing for the first time in his life without fear of the night. But shadows were watching. A black car passed slowly every evening. Men whispered near the gate. And one afternoon as Leo walked back from the store with bread in his arms, a hand grabbed his shoulder hard. You think you're special, kid, a rough voice hissed. He froze, heart pounding. You took what belongs to us. They dragged him toward the alley. But before fear could swallow him, a woman's voice shouted, leave him alone. Neighbors rushed out, phones raised. The men cursed and ran. Leo collapsed shaking. realizing the world was still dangerous, but this time he wasn't alone. The lawyer arrived that night with security and a serious face. "They're coming for you," he said, "not because you have money, but because you have her legacy, and they can't stand losing." Leo swallowed hard. "What do I do?" "You do exactly what she did," he answered. "Stay patient, stay kind, and let justice catch up, because it always does." And as days passed, more people learned about the home. Donations arrived, volunteers helped, children filled the rooms with laughter, while the powerful men sank deeper into investigations, lawsuits, and public shame. One was arrested for fraud, another for bribery, another fled the country, their empire of greed collapsing piece by piece, slow but unstoppable. And Leo would sit every night by the window, looking at the stars, whispering thank you, feeling sadness still there, but now mixed with hope, patience, and a quiet strength he never knew he had, knowing the woman who once owned everything had finally created something that could never be stolen. Weeks turned into months and the little house by the park was no longer quiet. It breathed with life now, footsteps running down the hall, spoons clinking in bowls, soft laughter drifting through open windows, and Leo woke every morning tired but smiling, because for the first time in his life people were counting on him, not for money, not for favors, just for care. Sadness still lived in his chest like a scar, but it no longer controlled him. It reminded him why he had to keep going. The lawyer visited often, bringing papers and updates. More foundations were opening under her name. Clinics in poor areas, schools in broken buildings, and everywhere people whispered about the woman who gave everything away at the end, while the men who once ruled her company were being dragged through courts and headlines. But one of them, the cruelest, the one who had ordered Leo taken, was still free, his power shrinking but his hatred growing. He blamed the boy for everything. And he wasn't finished. One rainy evening as thunder rolled across the sky, the lights in the house suddenly went out. The kids gasped. Fear rushed back like cold water. Leo grabbed a flashlight and tried to stay calm. "It's okay. Just a blackout," he said softly. But deep inside something felt wrong. Then the front door creaked slowly open, too slowly, and heavy footsteps entered. Leo's heart pounded as a tall shadow filled the hallway. "You should have stayed on the streets," the man's voice growled. The kids screamed. Leo stepped in front of them without thinking, his legs shaking but his eyes steady. "Leave them alone." The man laughed low and cruel. "Brave little hero. She chose you and look what it cost me, everything." He grabbed Leo's collar and slammed him against the wall. "Where did she hide the rest? Where's the money?" Leo struggled to breathe. "There is no money. It's gone to people who need it." "You lie," the man shouted, raising his fist. But before it could fall, headlights flashed through the windows, sirens cut the night like knives, and voices shouted, "Police! Drop him now." The man froze, cursed, and tried to run, but officers stormed in and tackled him to the floor, handcuffs snapping tight. Leo slid down the wall shaking as the children clung to him crying, "It's okay, it's okay," he whispered over and over, though his own tears were falling now too. The officers explained a neighbor had reported the blackout and suspicious movement, and the man had been under investigation for weeks. Fraud, threats, attempted kidnapping. It all finally caught up to him. As they dragged him away screaming that this wasn't over, the house fell silent again except for sobs and rain on the roof. But this silence felt different, lighter, safer, like a storm had finally passed. That night Leo didn't sleep. He sat by the kids' beds until morning, watching them breathe, realizing justice wasn't loud or fast. It was slow, patient, and unstoppable. Just like she had said. Days later the news confirmed the last of the powerful men had been arrested. The stolen company officially dissolved, its remaining assets transferred to public benefit funds. The world moved on, but for Leo it felt like a chapter closing. Donations increased, volunteers came from far away, teachers offered free lessons, doctors gave time at clinics, all because of one woman's final choice and one boy's courage. Sometimes reporters tried to talk to him, but he always shook his head. "This isn't about me," he would say, "it's about giving people a chance." One afternoon he visited her grave for the first time, a simple stone under a tree, no grand statue, just her name and a small quote, "Live so something grows after you're gone." Leo knelt, touching the grass softly. "I'm trying," he whispered. "I promise I won't waste what you gave me." The wind moved gently through the leaves like a quiet answer. And as he walked back toward the home filled with children's voices, he felt something he had never truly felt before. Not fear, not hunger, but belonging. and he knew the hardest parts were behind him, but the real work, the good work, was just beginning. Years passed quietly, not with headlines or drama, but with steady change. The small house by the park became a network of homes, then schools, then clinics, all connected by the same simple rule. No child is thrown away. Leo grew taller, stronger, his hands always busy fixing bikes, broken doors, broken heaters, and sometimes broken hearts. He kept the letters she wrote in his pocket every day, worn soft from being folded so many times, and whenever life felt heavy he would read her words and remember where it all started. Sadness never fully left him, but it became fuel instead of pain. The world still had cruelty, but now it also had places of safety, the kind he once dreamed of under bridges. The people who once ignored street kids now volunteered beside them, learning names, sharing meals, listening, and slowly the city changed, not fast, not perfect, but real, one life at a time. The men who tried to destroy it all faded into prison records and forgotten news, their power gone, their voices silent, while the woman who once ruled everything lived on in thousands of healed bodies and hopeful futures. One evening Leo stood outside a new clinic watching a little girl walk out smiling with medicine in her hand, the same kind his mother never got. His chest tightened but he smiled back, knowing the circle had finally broken. Later that night the kids gathered around him asking for stories. Tell us about the lady who started it all. Leo looked at their faces glowing in the soft light and spoke gently. She wasn't always kind, she wasn't always happy, but she listened when it mattered, and she chose love when she could have chosen nothing. The kids fell asleep one by one as his voice slowed, calm and warm. And when the room was quiet he stepped outside under the stars, whispering thank you once more, realizing justice doesn't always look like punishment. Sometimes it looks like healing, like growth, like a future where pain no longer decides who you become. And as the wind moved through the trees the same way it had years ago, Leo smiled softly, knowing her legacy was alive, not in money, not in buildings, but in every child who now woke up without fear.